I have a specific example in mind I'm not going to share. That's why I kind of I started to go down a road. I went, actually, I'm not going to share that. I'm going to divert this. I'm going to use my own extroverted feeling harmony and realize, no, that's probably going to land poorly and go down a different road. So that's kind of why I was like, it looked like I was setting up for something. I'm like, no, I'm abandoned ship. Go this way.
All
Never
right.
mind.
Fair enough. But I will give a good example in my opinion.
Harmony people terrify me. That's why, because I feel like they're going to come after me. Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this week on the show, we are concluding a short 4-part series looking at all 8 of the Jungian cognitive functions and examining the energies and expression of each of them, whether that's an analytic or assertive energy or a holistic or receptive energy. So that's a lot of words I just used. We'll unpack that step by step here. Just so you know, if you're a brand new listener, you're maybe don't know a lot about type, or you're a new listener, you need some orientation. If you go over to personalityhacker.com, our website, and you look up something called the CAR model, it's going to be very helpful in some of the things we're going to talk about today, because it's a metaphor for how personality types are expressed cognitively. So it shows you the mental wiring of the mind. Each personality type has a different CAR model they use, but the CAR model explanation will show you the framework that we use. And then you can apply that specifically to your Myers-Briggs personality type, or what some people call 16 personalities. And so I just wanted to reference that material to help you orientate to today, because we have a lot of preamble to lay the tracks for what we want to talk about today, because it's a little bit more advanced. If you're newer, this is some deeper material, and we want to bring it out to everyone and get deep with it. The other thing you can also do is you can join our Personality Quest program. It's a membership unlike any other you've been a part of, where we come together once a week live in a dynamic format. We go through the material of the podcast, but then right afterward, we go into breakout rooms, we do some journaling, and we do some group discussion to unpack the learning of these episodes and some of the things we talk about. And then we give everybody a challenge for the week to go try in their real life. So they come back with a real world experience, making personality type come alive for them. So those are 2 levers, the CAR model and also Quest, you might want to be a part of, that will really help you gain insight into some of the material I want to talk about today. So Antonia, let's jump into the content now that I've done some of the preamble. Lead us through how we're going to approach this.
All right, so for the last 3 weeks, we've talked about analytic versus holistic character traits. And they have just whether or not you have a preference for more analytic or a preference for more holistic energy, those come with certain character traits all by themselves. And then we've been taking that and marrying it with each, as you mentioned, each of the 8 Jungian cognitive functions, or the mental processes that are the building blocks of the Myers-Briggs system. We've been watching what happens when we, or observing that how that energy, the analytic or holistic energy, flavors the function. We did it in the first episode with the sensing functions. Then we, in the second episode, did the intuitive functions. In the third episode, we did the thinking functions. And now we're going to complete it with the feeling functions. And just to, in case you haven't been following along with us, in case this is the first of the series that you are tuned into, I want to do a quick compare contrast between analytic and holistic, just so that we get a sense of what those traits are. And it makes more sense why they flavor the functions in the way that they do. And I will, one more little bit of preamble. I will say too that it's really important to understand this concept. It's been built on the work of our friend and colleague, Dr. Dario Nardi. He is, I would recommend getting the book that this content is based off of. He's just released it on Amazon and on Radiance House, publishing platform Radiance House. It's called Decode Your Personality, 64 Brain-Based Subtypes to Go Beyond Myers-Briggs. Yep. And the reason why this work is so good and so refreshing is I think it really helps with mistypes and incomplete definitions of functions that almost all of us have.
Yeah.
And I think marrying these energies with functions and seeing a wider spectrum of how they can show up and a bigger territory that each of these functions takes in helps with things like not just mistypes, but also what are the real gifts that each of these functions have? Like, what are the lessons they have to teach us? And then in our own personality, for our particularly our favored functions, our driver and co-pilot in the car model, or our first or second, or dominant auxiliary, whatever vernacular you use, how can we make sure that they're not overly weighted or imbalanced toward one side or the other, creating one-sidedness? So I think it's a important concept, and I'm very happy that we've been presenting it.
And I just want to mention that Dario doesn't just draw on his own work. He also leans into Dr. Viktor Glenko, works with socionics in Europe. He came up with the nicknames for what we call subtypes. Dr. Helen Fisher for neurotransmitters and hormones. And then Dario's own work in EEG brain scans or brain images. He's noticed patterns of different, brain patterns basically that speak to some of these energies, analytic or holistic. We can actually see that on the brain scans. So there's some research and material to back up some of the things that we're asserting on this show. It's not just out of thin air. There's some real world tangibility to it.
No, we're making it up as we go. No, you're right. It's brain savvy science. Okay. So let's go through that compare contrast with analytic and holistic, and then get into the content of the feeling.
So this is just in a general sense. This isn't applied to any functions at first.
Right.
Okay. So
That's
as you're listening along, just in general, your entire system of you as a person, void of personality type, do you have more of an assertive, directed, focused energy in the world? Or do you have more of a holistic, diffused, receptive energy in the world? And we're going to talk about the qualitative nature of each of these.
All right. Okay. So the analytic style is the former of what you just described. It's the more goal focused, more driven, confident, has a sense of clarity about outcome. It's more top down in situations. The top down approach starts with the solution and looks for the problem. It's more visual. It prefers speed to some extent. It's more of a literal thinker and tuned into word content and facts. And it's more comfortable working in hierarchy. Holistic approach is the opposite of that. It's more open-ended. It's looking for input. It tends to be patient and curious, but not necessarily driven and focused. It tends to be a little bit more open to what we call information in the peripheral, which means that by definition, it's less laser target focused. It's more open to information that's kind of floating around. It considers all aspects of a situation at once. It's more about novel solutions than specific ones. It tends to have a bottom-up approach, more tuned into the figurative as opposed to the literal. And it's more egalitarian, right? And it doesn't like hierarchies as much. So obviously the analytic style is going to be seen in like business, engineering, government, law, military, science, technology. Whereas the holistic style is going to be more like the arts, social services, the humanities, that kind of thing. So those are the analytic and holistic preferences. And now we're going to pair them up with the feeling functions.
Yeah. So there's two feeling functions. There's extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed harmony. This is focused on the energy between humans, the needs of humans, the interaction, the way humans treat each other and the emotions that live out here in the outer space. But there's also introverted feeling. We're going to talk about this too. We nicknamed it authenticity. It's about the core values, the inner identity, resonant, the motivational structures that we all have. And so these two feeling processes, all of us access. Some of us have it as a strength. So introverted feeling or authenticity is a preferred function for FPs in the Myers-Briggs system. And extroverted feeling or harmony is the preferred function for FJs in the Myers-Briggs system.
Okay.
But all of us access this energy. All of us have part of this in us. We all have to interact with other people and know our identity and our motivations and things of this nature. It's just what sophistication do we have with it? What certainty do we have with it? And so that's really where you may not be aware of that energy as much as somebody else, but we all have access to them and we're all using them all the time.
Yeah. And as we mentioned in the last podcast on the thinking function, these are judging functions.
Oh, yeah.
Or decision making.
Where the fights happen, right?
Yeah.
The should statements of the world.
That's right.
Or evaluative criteria.
Our should statements of the world, of the world. It's like how should things be lined up? Well, these are the functions that tell us. And the feeling functions are going to be more values-based as a general rule. So starting with extroverted feeling. So as you mentioned, extroverted feeling is about understanding emotions outside of us because we use them for information, to read content from others to let us know how they're doing. I would say that the core of this function, on its most simple terms, is rapport. Right? It's the experiencing energy from other people and then cycling it out and then putting your energy out and then receiving and then giving and receiving and giving energies. And so that is effectively rapport, right? And when you're in rapport, then you get tuned into whether or not everybody's okay and what needs are going unmet and if everybody's in a good place and in good simpatico. And it's just kind of making sure everybody's all right all the time. And so there's two different styles of being tuned into that. The first one is the analytic style of extroverted feeling. Now, this is really interesting because I think people who have a more analytic version of extroverted feeling or harmony oftentimes think they're thinkers, right? It's very common. And Dario calls them the shepherds. That's what, or at least this function, analytic, is the shepherd function. So just like we've mentioned before, analytic means it's focused, it's goal-oriented, it's more assertive, and that holds true with extroverted feeling or harmony as well. It's about voicing society's values, right? It's shepherding people to ensure that the values that the person using this function have determined are important, shepherding others to ensure everybody's on board with those values. Now, they might do it in a very diplomatic way. They might say things like, hey, we should probably talk and get this worked out. But at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is corral everybody to ensure that important interactions and values between people and in culture and society, that nobody's being too much of a renegade against them.
Well, nobody's draining the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one's pulling on the group more than their share.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so it's important to corral outliers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who's not paying attention to these important values? Those are the people we have to get on board. And there's a sense that if we can all just get on board with these values, we can just solve all the problems. and it can go big, right? Because it's analytic, and analytic tends to be more goal-oriented and more assertive. Then it goes from smaller interactions into sometimes into whole societal thinking, right? Everybody needs to get on board with this value, because if not, I mean, like maybe a couple people can be outliers, but let's make sure that they understand that they're not cooperating with the system and society and culture. And so because of that, there's going to be consequences.
Yeah. Well, and they're not wrong. I mean, look at what this has done for societies. We have manners and certain behavioral expectations that actually has made our world better. Imagine, living during Roman times when you could be on a road somewhere and get killed, or there's all these other, there's like social expectations that keep us safe outside of just like legalities and law enforcement, right? We kind of just expect that humans will treat us a certain way. And so I think if there is enough consensus, you can change culture to have different expectations, different outcomes.
Yep.
They're right in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And especially since the fundamental goal is to do it for one's own and everybody else's good, right? There's a real desire to create win-wins, and there's a desire to see people healed and make sure everybody's doing okay, and make sure that the system isn't sick. I think that's ultimately what analytic extroverted feeling or harmony is attempting to do. The challenge is that not everybody agrees on those values. And so if a person has this, the analytic version of this in a one-sided way, in an attempt to help, they might actually become a bully, right? In an attempt to make it better for everybody, they might end up, actually having some acceptable losses, right? And in part, they're willing to do big sacrifices for this greater good. So you're going to have to do big sacrifices too, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not you agree with their assertions.
There's a great part in the show, The Good Place. I don't know which episode or season it is, but they talk about because they're talking about how to be a good person or bad person, or whatever. They're like, change behavior first and people's hearts will follow. And I feel like that's such a shepherd, extroverted feeling, harmony viewpoint. is like get right action, get consensus, get everybody moving the right direction. And then people will learn to like it. Their hearts will follow later, right?
Right. Yep.
The other thing this could also show up at is something like an arranged marriage. Like we're going to construct something that makes sense. Yeah, maybe you don't feel like you love that person now, but go ahead and arrange it. You're going to learn to love them later over time, right? Because we're going to force this, we're going to make this thing happen. And then you're going to accommodate your own internal sense. Your heart will match the external framework later.
Yeah.
But let's get the framework going first and then let your heart catch up.
Yeah. And that's a hard concept for Westerners at this point to really consider because we haven't done that for so long.
Yeah.
That was the standard social contract for most cultures around the world for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's only in recent times that we're not doing that. And a part of it is because it's, to some extent kind of makes sense and is good for everybody. And we make sacrifices as individuals for the greater good. And so I agree with you. I think that that kind of arrangement does feel very shepherd, extroverted feeling or harmony.
Yep.
Daria mentions that they can be really inspiring orators. And in an organization, they're going to help everybody be aware of the organization's values and get in sync as best they can. A church pastor is an obvious example, but the extreme is cult-like, right? So that's when it goes bad, is when we're getting people a little too on board, even against their better judgment. Mostly they're inspiring, advising, corralling, and shepherding. But there's going to be some black sheep around who don't want to be brought into the pen. And this is where maturity versus one-sidedness comes in. So again, that bullying can come from the one-sided version of this. And we talk a lot about how extroverted feeling or harmony is about getting people's needs met. And I remember somebody taking some exception to that. I think the person had ENFJ preferences and they didn't really resonate with that description. And they probably actually have shepherd. I mean, I would suspect that if they have ENFJ preferences and they don't really resonate with that piece, that they probably have the shepherd version or the analytic version of extroverted feeling or harmony. But I see it as a lot of times the analytic versions are like the writ large versions.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is about getting people's needs met. It's just not doing it on an individual tuning into one-to-one person element. It's more like all people's needs. And that's really what culture's about. Culture and society, to some extent, it's not the only thing it's about. But one of the things it's about is making sure that we all as a society and collective, if at all possible, are mostly okay in getting our needs met. And so I think the shepherd version of this still thinks in those terms, but does it on to scale, right?
You can't spell culture without cult.
Yeah, right.
And it speaks to that. You mentioned cult leader at the worst extreme example of this. And so I think that's the one-sided piece is, that buy-in, that consensus buy-in. It's almost a cult-like nature culture has.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that rubs me the wrong way, but I understand it. I know it's needed in a lot of ways in society. I am one of those black sheep that they're trying to corral often and bring into the fold that doesn't like to play well. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and again, maturity comes in here. If it's one-sided without maturity, if it has no, and we'll talk about holistic extroverted feeling in a moment. But if, the goal, and sometimes people go, well, I think I have both sides. Can I have both? And it's like, yeah, you want both. You actually want both the analytic and the holistic. As we've mentioned in the previous podcast, the goal is to have a really beautiful balance of the two, because the balancing act is where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
If you're too one-sided, too analytic, or too holistic, and you don't have enough of the other side, usually that's a sign of a lack of maturity, and it does rub people the wrong way. Even if you're extremely diplomatic about it, even if you're super nice about it, it doesn't matter. It will still rub people the wrong way, because at the end of the day, you're saying you need to sacrifice your individualism in behalf of what I believe is the greater good. And it's like, well, who are you?
Yeah.
Why do you get to decide that? And I think the maturity comes into play, and we'll talk about the holistic version, but the maturity comes into play in not being so aggressive about one's own assumptions of values.
I think the other way this can go too, though, is, we talked about in the very first episode, this idea of top down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've talked about it in every episode, but I said it's like you have a hammer and all the world's a nail.
Mm-hmm.
I think top down for a shepherd, extroverted feeling or harmony person, or this energy in the function, maybe the person's not the thing, but it's the function, is, on that writ large idea you said, it's not even getting needs met. It's signaling that we're the type of people that would get needs met if there was a need here.
Right.
There's a lot of signaling going on that's like in an abstraction because it's not about the actual people that's the need. It's like setting the framework. And so we signal back and forth that that's the type of people we are. And I need you to signal it to me. And it actually isn't solving anything. It's just it's ensuring that at the top level, the highest level, top down, we're sending a message that this is how we're supposed to behave. And we all need to signal this together. And I think a lot of people are confused on what's going on there. But I think that's that analytic push, extroverted feeling or harmony to say, you need that marker to show that you're a safe person. You're in the group with everybody else. And I think that's what's often, I would say for people outside, it's very confusing.
Yeah, I would agree. And tag that. I just tagged it because I think after we talk about the holistic version, you can see how a merging of the two will help solve that.
Yeah.
And so, there's an underlying assumption that if everyone joins arms in mutual agreement, consideration, and cooperation, aligning and honoring values and behavior, then any and all problems can be solved. That's the underlying assumption of the shepherd extroverted feeling or harmony energy. And I think a lot would be solved, but not everything, right? And so there's a willingness, though, to make sacrifices, big sacrifices. But there's also an expectation everybody's going to make big sacrifices. So the beautiful things that come along with the analytic version is increased leadership. Again, a lot of times people who have the analytic version of this function think that they're TJ types. I think that's very common. It's diplomacy, it's articulation, it's leadership, it's a shepherding capacity, it's corralling, it's teaching good lessons, right? There's a lot of positive stuff that comes along with it. But there's also some assumptive thinking. There can be some bullying, right? Whether intentional or unintentional. And so it needs to be balanced with another energy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that other energy. So the holistic extroverted feeling or harmony, Dario calls the host.
Yeah.
And it's basically like being a host for the world all the time to some extent. This is really the side of the function that is looking for and scanning for unmet needs, trying to get those needs met, like a host would.
Personal needs.
You got it. Exactly. And the sacrifices don't tend to be the big sacrifices like the analytic. It tends to be a lot of little sacrifices all the time, right? So it's like moment to moment, the willingness to make little sacrifices in behalf of the context or the environment or the people one loves. It's like being a host, right? All the time.
And I think this shows up a lot for FJs, people that use this as a preferred function, in the phrase, okay, I don't agree with what's going on, but I'll just have this say in my heart. Like that's like a very tangible way it might show up for you if this is more your style.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the receptive extroverted feeling or harmony that is very empathic, right? Because you're receiving that information. You're receiving the emotional information that you're reading off of others, as opposed to the analytic that rolls up their sleeves and gets to work then on making it so everybody's okay, right? Or at least wanting to do that, wanting to shepherd and corral everybody to make sure everything's okay. This is a receptive energy, so it tends to be more sensitive to other people's feelings. And because of that, they can be that can show up as getting one's feelings hurt easily, but it can also show up as being as like not wanting to rock the boat, not wanting to offend anybody, always making sure that the things you say are like the kind thing to say. And so it can lack directness. I mean, it's the receptive version, right? So it's going to lack that assertion. It's maybe going to have a hard time speaking up for itself. And maybe take a lot of hits that it didn't need to, right? The willingness to make lots of sacrifices, along with the inability to communicate and articulate when that's happening, out of fear of being insensitive, can make it so that the holistic version can take a lot of arrows.
And so how this would look for you, if this is your preferred function again, is, man, I'm doing all this emotional labor for everybody. No one's looking out for me. They're not even seeing the value I'm adding between the cracks. And it's so emotional, it's so heavy of a lift. Why am I not getting recognized for this? In fact, I'm getting used and I feel resentful and I feel upset. And I don't like the fact that I'm not able to have a reciprocity to the energy that I'm giving out. So I think that's how it shows up in a like if you're trying to identify this in yourself, I think that's how it can feel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Uh, Dario says that they're holding space almost all the time
Mm-hmm.
as a host, right? Mentality. He says holding space generally means being present, attentive, but not interfering, ready to help if asked. Imagine living a whole life holding space for others, right? And so it's like it's like an attentiveness. It's like a readiness to help people if at all possible. And so some of the stereotypes we get around extroverted feeling being like endlessly sacrificing is usually more the holistic version. Now, the analytic version will also make sacrifices, but they're usually making big sacrifices, as you mentioned, as a signal, right,
Mm-hmm.
to others and asking other people to make those sacrifices too. The holistic version isn't asking anybody to do that, right? They're just the ones who are making all of the little micro sacrifices all the time, which can be okay, but also can be, death by a thousand cuts. And so the sensitivity, it means like being particularly tuned into social approval as well. So they don't really like to embarrass anybody or be embarrassed. That's that's a thing that they're going to do everything they can to avoid. They might even be superficially nice sometimes, or read other people as being superficially nice and not knowing whether or not they meant what they actually said. And they can be kind of caught up in lots of little dramas.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas analytic, extroverted feeling or harmony, if they're going to be embroiled in drama, it's going to be big drama, right? Like big, massive social scale level drama, perhaps. Like maybe, like as a social justice warrior on social media, right? And being embroiled in all of that. Whereas the holistic extroverted feeling is more going to be like having beefs with people like in their life. It's a little bit more like you mentioned before, like the difference between digital and analog. I think we were talking about it in the thinking functions. This is going to be more of an analog version, and it's going to be more tuned into what's really going on in their lives. So there's beautiful things that come from it. That there's that empathy, the sensitivity, the desire to make sure everybody's okay, the willingness to make little sacrifices. But there also can, like you mentioned, there can be a recipe for resentment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not speaking up for oneself and not handling things, ensuring that there are two-sided relationships, finding themselves in a lot of one-sided relationships, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the solution, as with all of these, has been to merge the energies. And when you get both sides of it, now you get somebody who is willing to stand up for right things, who is willing to be, that analytic side, which is communicating what is acceptable and isn't acceptable, and willing to, make big sacrifices for big things, but also at the same time has a sensitivity and empathy about them to ensure that they're not stepping on toes or bulldozing, not making assumptions, not going, well, everybody just needs to see it from my, I don't think the person would think from my values, but from the values, right? The overarching important values. Well, the more holistic side will give them some sort of discretion around it, more tapping into the energies that are actually at play, being empathetic of a person and what's going on for them in their experience. So if they aren't, can't be corralled, well, what's going on for them as an individual and what's happening? And maybe that's something I should take into consideration and not just assume that they need to be, everybody needs to be on board. It allows for a more individualistic experience of extroverted feeling, more of a relational component, like a person-to-person relational component, as opposed to the abstraction of a person.
Yeah.
And that you just need to get on board.
Is that what you wrote down there? You were going to weave something together later?
Well, and you mentioned signaling, right? The signaling at the analytic level. I think the holistic level is less about signaling and more about doing, right?
Yeah.
Like they're more going to be active and actually engaged with getting people's needs met, as opposed to just conceptualizing it and signaling it.
Yeah, I can think of right now, and maybe a more analytic, extroverted feeling person asserting maybe symbols or imagery or something to communicate an ideal, like a cultural ideal. And maybe another person going and taking action toward that cultural ideal more of a holistic way. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of like the signal, the message versus the action. It would be. I don't know. It's like top down, bottom up. It's like you can kind of think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I have a specific example in mind I'm not going to share. That's why I kind of I started to go down a road. I went, actually, I'm not going to share that. I'm going to divert this. I'm going to use my own extroverted feeling harmony and realize, no, that's probably going to land poorly and go down a different road. So that's kind of why I was like, it looked like I was setting up for something. I'm like, no, I'm banded ship. Go this way.
All right.
Never mind.
Fair enough. But I will give a good example in my opinion.
Harmony people terrify me. That's why, because I feel like they're going to come after me. Like, it's weird. These so nice, accommodating, get needs met people. But I feel like that's the mob that's going to come to my house. Of all the energy of the functions.
Well, it's the analytic extroverted feeling or harmony that I think you particularly have been bitten by in the past. Yeah. And as Dario mentions, what if somebody can't be corralled? Case in point.
Let's cancel them.
Well, he says that's where maturity comes in. Right. And if they're too one-sided, then that is a problem. And you're, that canceling, quote unquote, canceling. And there's a lot of people who don't even think it's a thing and other people who think it's absolutely a thing. But regardless of whether or not canceling is really a thing, the concept of it.
How can it happens? How could it not be a thing? How's reality not a thing? What are you talking about?
Now people are going to come after you and tell you how it's not a thing. Anyway.
What? Are you serious? People really don't believe this reality's happening? I'm sorry. We'll keep going. I'll let them come after me and correct me.
That's right.
In my incorrect viewpoint of what I see as reality. Continue, please.
Well, and that's I'm gonna point to that actually. The mature, perspective on all of this is maybe there's a reason you have a difference of opinions.
Sure.
Right? And case in point with holistic extroverted feeling. That's going to be the version of extroverted feeling that is tuned into the individual experience and goes, well, there's a reason you believe that. And so I'm going to be tuned into that and I'm going to hear it, right? I'm going to kind of understand what's going on for you, right? I'm going to be empathetic to your feelings around that. As opposed to the analytic that might come in and argue. But when those two energies are married together, now you have somebody, again, who can tune into the individual and understand individual needs and recognize that, maybe I have to meet people where they're at, right? Maybe I can't just insist on something. I have to meet people where they're at. But then at the same time, has the capacity to stand up for themselves, has the capacity when they truly see things happening that they don't agree with or believe in, that they can go in with a corrective energy, which... I mean, we need shepherding, right? We need leadership in that way. We need to be.
I agree.
We need corrective energy out there. There's plenty of people who need correcting. And so has the capacity to bring corrective energy, but without, I would say probably without making it about their ego, right? I'm bringing corrective energy as opposed to going, there's a need here for corrective energy. And I am in a position to be able to bring it. Mm-hmm. And so those two energies together, I think really create a beautiful, a really altruistic marriage of showing up for people, not just holding space for people in perpetuity forever and always taking the arrows and the hits. That's not healthy, but not always, demanding everybody agree with one's values, right? And that everybody has to get on board and shut up and put up because this is how we solve the world's problems. Right?
Yeah.
It's there's a center point between those two things. And that's when bringing the analytic and holistic together creates that beautiful balance.
Can I save myself some time just to lay one thing down here?
Yeah.
When I say canceling is real, what I mean is there's an attempt by a coalition of people with intent to cancel somebody.
Yes, the intent of canceling.
It doesn't always mean the result is there. Sometimes people are able to escape the attempt to cancel them.
Right.
So I guess that's the argument is well, it doesn't actually happen. So it doesn't exist. I'm like, no, it exists. Just because you didn't get the result doesn't mean that wasn't the attempt.
Right.
Or what was the play.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that's the frame we're coming from. And if you can tell me that I'm wrong in that, that's fine. But I just I clearly see that's the attempt. And I wouldn't even know how to argue with somebody that has a different worldview of that. Cause I'm like, okay, we're not living in the same reality then, which is fine. We don't have to. But I would have no idea how to engage with that material or that argument.
That's a fabulous segue to introverted feeling.
Exactly. I was going to say it because I'm focused on intent. I'm an ENFP, so I'm definitely tuned into that. And whereas an extroverted feeling person might be more focused on the outcome of the intent.
Right.
So canceling doesn't exist because this person clearly didn't get canceled. They were able to escape it. I'm like, that doesn't make that true though. Because the intent was there.
They didn't. It might be because they didn't learn their lesson. So canceling might not be real to people because
There
the
you go.
discipline didn't actually work.
It didn't work.
So it's not a thing. I don't know. I'm trying to.
That'd be like saying a
pattern.
timeout doesn't exist. That's not, timeouts aren't real because that kid didn't learn their lesson.
Well,
Okay.
you're arguing
know,
with my
I know.
interpretation right now,
I'm so
not
sorry.
with other people actually saying this.
Clearly, this is an issue in my life I need to sort out, and I'll just get through it. Let's go over to introverted feeling, authenticity. To talk about that. So authenticity, again, is tuned into, in general, the function is tuned into the resonance inside, the motivations, the core values, the intention of action, the impact that we make, and the intention toward that impact. So I think this is where, and by the way, this is a strength or a preferred function for all FPs in the Myers-Briggs system.
Right. It's really, I would say its core is self-intimacy, right? It's like, it's a desire to understand like not just intentions, but my intentions, right? It's like a very personal experience one has with oneself. And so it's my values, my intentions, my conscience, my perspective built on a lifetime of my lived experience as a person.
Knowing the self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't mean that everybody who uses this function, even as a preferred function, is, really super self-aware. I mean, I can think of people who have this as a first function that lack what I would call self-awareness, but I'm only seeing them in a social context, right? Like, I don't know what their private thoughts are with themselves. They appear to lack self-awareness because of how they show up, but that's not the same thing. They might actually be quite tapped in to at least how they're feeling about things, minimum how they're feeling. And then the goal, as the function, develops and matures, is to not just know how one feels, but also how that drives them, how that motivates them, and what their likes and dislikes are. Like the things that pull them towards and are attractive, and the things that push them away, and what that says about them. And so it's really about me, right? And what's going on for me. So there's a more, just like with all the functions, there's a more analytic and a more holistic version. So let's talk about the analytic version of it, introverted feeling. There's the word that, or the name that Dario chose for the analytic version of introverted feeling is the quester. So I find this really interesting that quest is a word that he chose.
By the way, side note, you should join the quest this week. We're launching very shortly to talk about this episode, and then we're going to unpack it. Breakout sessions, journaling, a challenge this week.
Yeah, there's that analytic, extroverted intuition or exploration.
I like this word, quester. It speaks to the program we just launched recently.
And it's about pursuing a particular singular life quest or truth, and choices and habits being organized around it.
Yeah.
So just like with the analytic introverted thinking or accuracy, which we talked about in the previous podcast, having like basically a mental model or a model and being very stubborn on those principles around that. This is about having a quest, a purpose. This is the thing that I'm dedicating my life to, and everything else gets organized around it. So there's almost like a missionary feel about it.
Dude, my dad has ISFP preferences. He and my mom started an organization that they literally have the name Crusade in their official name of it. Like back in the 1970s, it was called Christian Youth Crusade. This idea of crusade, I think he's got analytic, introverted feeling or authenticity. And it was always about crusading for God. And it was very single-minded. I mean, he's still single-minded. And I grew up in this environment. It was like, that's what my introverted feeling or authenticity thought you had to do. You had to pick something and be on a mission for it.
Yeah.
And you'll either get there or you'll die trying. I think that's really the energy baked into this.
Well, and their public facing name even has the word quest in it.
Yeah.
Right. And so their official, the name has crusade, and their public facing name has quest.
Yeah.
And so
I never even connected those two until just now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So they have
even his organization is a shadow of how analytic his introverted feeling or authenticity is.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I never put those two together.
Yeah, and actually what's interesting is that there's so much clarity around the quest or the crusade, usually for people that have analytic. And maybe we should use examples that don't feel so missionary and religious oriented in
Sure.
just a moment, but usually there's so much clarity around that they can score or test as thinking types,
Hmm.
because it doesn't feel emotional. It just feels deep, right? It feels deep, profound, and important.
Well, there's tons of Hollywood actors. Uh, who's the guy? I mean, I'm not going to talk about anything specific that he's focused on driving forward or what he cares about, but I would just say, oh, Sean Penn. I would say Sean Penn. I don't care if he's an introverted feeling or authenticity user. He feels like a person that has analytic, introverted feeling or authenticity. When he has a cause or something he's toward, he's like single-minded, almost to an absurd level. Like he can't let any other information come in. He's just focused on it and like embodies every aspect of it. And he just like lives in this congruent, like I will die or this thing will happen framework.
Yep. Yeah. And
Joan of
actually,
Arc energy, I guess.
yeah. And that consistency of showing up and having everything be filtered through the things that are important to them is one of the symbols of an analytic, introverted feeling or authenticity user.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the symbols of an analytic, extroverted feeling and harmony user, too. The analytic types or feeling functions, they tend to have very consistent, I could call them personas, right? Their interface with the outside world. They show up the same in every context or situation because they're standing for these values that are almost outside of themselves, but for introverted feeling, feel like themselves. Whereas the holistic versions, and we'll talk about holistic introverted feeling or authenticity in a moment, they're way more flexible. Like holistic extroverted feeling or harmony that we just talked about, it because it's interfacing with the individual and kind of trying to figure out what their needs are, it can almost feel like a chameleon. They can look very different from person to person because they're showing up to meet that person's needs. Whereas uh, the analytic version will show up for the values, right?
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with introverted feeling, because everything is being filtered through, like, are my actions, beliefs, feelings, relationships, habits, and so on all consistent regardless of what kind of situation I'm in, right? Am I acting 100% consistent, and usually consistent with the thing that I think is important with my crusade or my quest? And that makes them usually show up the exact same no matter where they go. uh, an example, and I had forgotten that Dario had put this in, so I'm just going to read it because I think it's so good. It might not be somebody who's religious necessarily. It might be, say, a musician. He says, think of an ISFP who is utterly devoted to a singular practice, music. He or she will say, it's all about the music, even though fame, fun, money, and travel are part of the experience too. They believe, maybe fear, that their music will be fake and they will fail if they're not dedicated to a raw honesty.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's all about the music. And if they get at all distracted by anything else, that will take them off of the crusade, right?
It's a
about
great
the music.
example. Yeah.
So that's not like a mission or a religion or politics or anything. It's just music, but it still has that single-minded focus and trying to honor that,
Yep.
the thing that's so important.
Yep.
So they usually come across as really dedicated. They might be kind of black and white and maybe even judgmental. But they're usually capable of a lot of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the introverted feeling, like analytic introverted feeling, tends to have more success because they are so driven and because they are so single-minded. And oftentimes single-minded determination is one of the key nodes in the system of success. So these are the types that tend to have a little bit more success in their life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's talk about the more holistic introverted feeling, authenticity. I think I resonate with this one a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I almost feel bad doing the talking on it because I think, I want to
do it so I can resonate. I want to hear it and resonate as you talk it out. Let's do it.
I want to punt the ball over to you as soon as we describe it. So Dario calls the holistic introverted feeling or authenticity energy the romantic. And he has kind of some flowery language around it. He's like, oh, the romantic, right? He says this person is particularly existential. And I think it's because it is a life of deep, quiet feeling, full of stories and moments and everything having its own beauty in its own sorrow. Like it's a life, it's being tapped into how all of life is making the person feel. That's the really introspective element. When I say that not everybody who has the function is particularly introspective, it's because the analytic version of introverted feeling or authenticity isn't always particularly introspective. It knows it's one thing, or it knows the thing that it's almost like, this is what I was put on earth to do, so I'm going to go do it. The romantic or the holistic version is introspective. It's very connected with all of the experiences and all of the dramas of life and what it tells about the person, or tells oneself about oneself. And I think the major difference here is that there isn't a consistency of showing up. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It almost feels fickle. It feels like every situation is a completely new, it's like a new opportunity for me to show up as a different part of myself. And so instead of having this like rigorous consistency of behavior and values and all that stuff, it actually celebrates the variety. It celebrates all the different aspects and all the different, this situation brought this out in me, and this situation brought this out in me. And so there's a complexity of engagement and interaction, and there might not be a consistent persona, right? There might be, like, again, a more chameleon-like presence.
Yeah. This trips you up when you're running a business, by the way, and you're more invested in the success of people that come and work with you, and you're trying to find a win-win. I'm not speaking from personal experience at all. You're seeing this person, you're saying, well, I can't just have them work with us and help build what we're doing. We also have to make sure we match and make sure they're getting just as much value for their own life or whatever they're interested in too. It has to be a perfect win-win. The challenge is that's diffused energy then. Mm-hmm. It doesn't capture the value and how building towards something. You end up working on behalf of all these other satellite energies all the time, and nothing ever really gets accomplished, in that energy. So you have to really work hard to not continue to send that energy out and bring it in-house from a business standpoint.
Yeah, it's hard to get traction.
Personal experience.
Right.
That's something you have to overcome.
When everybody is being honored equally in every capacity, including all the different parts of yourself and all the different parts of everybody else, that is very diffused energy.
That's very inefficient. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
It's the most inefficient thing ever.
Yep. And there's all these different voices and feelings that come up every day. And the holistic version says, I'm just going to be, right? I'm just going to roll with it. And so there's not a lot of opportunity for traction there if you're just rolling with everything all the time. Dario mentions that this person might have many soft quests, multiple soft quests, a lot of fingers in a lot of different pies, and subtly diverse identities, even within a single relationship, right? That also makes me think of you.
Yeah. I think I definitely have a holistic version of this, of authenticity. And I resonate with it deeply, and pretty much everything you've said so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of beautiful things here. There's a lot of understanding different feelings and making room for them. Emotional processing is a little easier. I think that's the holistic version of introverted feeling or authenticity that is more in touch with emotional processing and release and that sort of thing, as opposed to the analytic that might bottle it up, right? Or might try to use it in behalf of the crusade. This is the one that's more in touch with feelings on an individual, deep personal level. But as you can imagine, this can also be a bit of a wishy-washy person.
Yeah.
Right. There's no real strong, roots, or not roots. It's like there's no ballast, I guess. And if you're so many different things, so at many times of the day, like, how do you build on that? Yeah. This thing made me feel this way, so I guess I'm not going to do that anymore. Even though it made me feel differently yesterday, I'm not going to do it today. Well, it's like, how do you, at the worst, it's absolute worst, how do you hold down a job then? Right.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite of successful.
I can see, so we're going to talk about in a moment here that we all have these energies in us, and we all want to balance out both holistic and analytic. And if I look at my introverted feeling, one of the things that I've been working on for the last 10 years, like a decade, is moving from more of a holistic, receptive, open to more of an assertive, directive, focused energy. And I think the personality quest is a perfect example of this, in if you listen back to the Personality Hacker podcast, maybe 5 years ago, my statements might be like, if you're interested, you might want to check out and maybe come over, and like all these hedging, phrases, and, only if it's right for you. Just, do what makes sense for you and what feels right for you. It's very open-ended, not very like directive or convicted about it. And now if you listen to my language, I still struggle with that. I still have that kind of framework a lot, but I'm really trying to add in like, hey, and I'm getting more assertive, like, you need to join Personality Quest. They're going to be amazing. You're going to have a great experience. We're on a mission together. We're seeking out a real way of applying personality type in our lives. I'm talking in these terms. I'm bringing more of that assertive energy. And so I'm just reviewing. I'm watching myself try to pull that energy more over to the analytic, because I think it's actually what our team and people in our ecosystem need. Even though it's not naturally in me as much, I can access that and grow and develop it. And I think it's going to serve everybody better. And so I think that gives us this avenue of leaning into the other. I'm trying to give an example of how that might look for somebody.
Yeah.
Regardless of what function you're focused on. I'm just talking about authenticity or introverted feeling right now.
Right. But
it might be a different function for you. But that's how you can start to lean into another part of yourself. And sometimes that can really be a good thing in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think, we've been talking about your ability to pitch as being more like the analytic, extroverted intuition or exploration. But I do think I do remember you throttling that energy more if it wasn't right for the individual, right?
Yeah.
And I think now you're going a little bit more like, yeah, it probably would be good for you, right?
Yeah.
Like
I'm asserting things more.
Yeah, a lot more assertive. And I don't think it's the intuition. I think it's the feeling that's becoming more analytic.
Yeah, and I like it. I like developing that part. It feels good. It feels weird at first, but it feels really good to develop that aspect.
Well, I think it's natural to you. I think one of the reasons why, just like I talked about my story, that my introverted thinking or accuracy was the only thing I was allowed to have analytic. But then when I left my religion, I had to go super holistic just to reprogram my mind. And so there's a little bit more of a balance. For you, I think analytic is more natural to you. Like, I think you came out of the hatch more analytic, introverted feeling or authenticity.
But my context.
But the context, like, there was not a lot of room in your family for more than one, and your dad with ISFP preferences got top billing.
Yep.
So you trained yourself into a more holistic version. But I think now that you're entering a more analytic, it's feeling right. Like, it's feeling like, yeah, this is what I need to be doing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think the learning there is that your context, if you're listening or watching right now, your context might have pushed you to the flavor that maybe isn't naturally wired for you. Like, maybe you lean more toward one side or the other, but your context kind of forced you or shaped you into a certain way of expressing yourself. And then just know that, oh man, there's a whole nother avenue available to you of growth and access.
Yeah. Alternatively, your context may have encouraged you to be very one-sided.
True.
And the thing you do like, and then the same deal though. There's another side here waiting to balance out if you haven't already done that work. I will say, just to wrap up introverted feeling and to talk about it as emerged, like when they're balanced. Dario gives an example of like a writer with introverted feeling preferences that they might, like, if they're holistic, they have no problem writing a bad character, right? Because they understand it. They understand that there's good and bad in everybody, and there's a lot more nuance around that. Whereas the analytic might really struggle to write a bad character because they want all their characters to conform to the thing that they think is important. And when they do write a bad character, it might be somebody who is like a lesson, right? Like an object lesson, like, don't do that thing because see, it'll turn out really bad. So if you're trying to determine which side you have a preference for, is it easy to write those kinds of characters and you have no problem dipping into the dark? Or do you have a kind of a hard time dipping into the dark and only want to do that as an object lesson? But the reason why it's so important to merge these is the wishy-washiness of not really having a handle on one's identity. There's a lot of beauty that comes from seeing all that variety and hearing all the voices and understanding that there's a whole council going on and there's lots of different parts of you that have a lot of different agendas. And being in tuned and tapped into that is heightened self-awareness. It really is. It's an understanding. It's an introspective understanding of the reality of what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
So the holistic version of introverted feeling or authenticity, I think, taps into the true authenticity, right? Like the true realness of what it's like to be a person. But it needs that analytic version because it also needs to stand for something. It can't just see all of that and go like the holistic versus analytic introverted thinking, right? Or accuracy we talked about in the previous podcast. If you're too holistic, you just have no motivation for anything. You don't care. Everything is just so absurd. So you have to have expertise in something with introverted thinking. With introverted feeling or authenticity, you have to stand for something, right? You have to allow yourself to take a stand on something, even if it's just for yourself, right? And so you're not wishy-washy. You're not just sort of letting the world happen to you over time. That there's a sense of purpose and direction and a sense of campaign and a sense of, a sense of crusade. I'm here to do something. But you don't want to be too one-sided on that side either, because now you're rigid, you're locked in. You actually aren't tapped into your emotional experience. Everything is being corralled and funneled toward this crusade. And that one-sidedness can also have real consequences and problems, right? Like you might be actually doing acts of self-betrayal without even realizing it.
Yeah.
So the merging of the two allows an integrity of self and a tapping into the truth and, sort of the vulnerability of being a person, right? And all of those emotions that are true and real, including the dark parts of the heart, while the analytic part comes in and goes, but I actually do stand for something. I actually am going to get something done. I actually have purpose here. And I'm not going to let anything really stand in my way. I'm going to keep going towards it. And that merging of the two, you can see FP types in particular who have merged that. They're just these beautiful souls that are doing cool stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of value in balancing that.
So what do you think? You've been listening or watching along with us here. It's been the two of us talking. We don't have a third microphone, but we do want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Under this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your story. Stories are compressed experiences. We can see what's going on for you in your life through the stories that you tell us. And not just us, but the community that we've gathered here that listen to this podcast, that are part of the Personality Hacker family, the ethos, the ecosystem. And in fact, to that end, you should also join our Personality Quest program. I know, kind of tongue in cheek, and somebody's smirking at me like, come on, Joey, keep pitching this thing. But I am tapping more into my analytic,
that's right,
introverted feeling, authenticity. And I do feel conviction around this. I do think it's an awesome thing. And I think people are going to resonate deeply with it. It may not be for everybody, but I think it's probably for you if you're listening or watching right now. And I think you're going to love coming over and being a part of that. Anyway, come over to personalhacker.com, find out more about quests, find out more how you can leave a comment below this episode. Make your voice heard. Come over and get involved. Make this stuff become real in your life, not just an academic pursuit, but connect it in a real way. Make a difference for yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think what is definitely striking both of our introverted feeling or authenticity, regardless of where it's at, even though mine's a little baby and way, way, way down there, is the importance and I think our repeated insistence.
Oh, yeah.
Not that we can insist on anything, but our repeated reminders to make it alive for you. Like the reason why people are attracted to this content is because I think that we can instinctively feel its power, but the power only works if you start applying it in your life.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I think it's really important to apply, and I think quests are a great starting point.
That's exactly what it is. That's what I'm convicted about.
Yeah.
Is the application.
Yeah.
The real world nature, the analog nature of it, not just the debating and arguing with people online and trolling people in comments and all that BS that we see in whatever topic, fill in the topic.
Yeah.
But connecting something in a real way.
Yeah.
And Quest is just one way to do that. Coming over, making a comment is one way to do that. There's a bunch of ways you can do that, but I am absolutely convicted about making this real for yourself.
Yeah.
And that is very congruent down to the deepest parts of myself.
I concur.
There you go.
My introverted
there you
feeling
go. You're on board too. I love it. Fist bumps right here. We got it.
We have fist bumps more this podcast series than I think we ever have.
I think it's because we're doing a great job.
Go us.
They're deserved. They're well-deserved fist bumps.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. You may be watching us on YouTube right now. You can subscribe, and hit the bell so that you are made aware of future episodes. We also do a premiere every Sunday. As Joel mentioned, you can join us on the quest, but we also, at the time of this recording, are premiering the video. So come join us at the premiere, even if you're not in the quest, but you should be. But even if you're not, you can still watch it live, and we have a little bit of interaction afterwards too. So come do that. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. If you have not yet done so, think about picking up a copy. Nope. My Analytic Extroverted Intuition or Exploration says, go get a copy.
There you
It
go.
is fabulous.
Oh, I like that now.
Do you see that?
Drawing this out. Good
Working on
job.
the Analytic. And let's see. Where am I at in my little spiel? Did I
Book
hit
copy
everything?
quest. Yeah, I think you did.
I think I hit
I
everything.
think we're good.
All right. So we can wrap up this 4-part series.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yes.
And the final.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, a pitch for our friend Dario.
Yeah.
Also, go get Decode Your Personality, 64
There you go.
brain-based subtypes to go beyond Myers-Briggs. It is currently on Amazon and Radiance House.
That almost deserves an extra fist bump for getting that in the last minute there. My name. Go ahead.
Let's not be too self-indulgent. We'll do that after.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you in 2 minutes on the Personality Quest or next week on the Personality Hacker Podcast.